The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clanged against the concrete driveway. From inside the house, I could hear my wife Diana whispering urgently to someone on the phone. The words, "moving fast," and "Rick's got the keys," drifted through the screen door like smoke signals of betrayal. I wiped my hands on my jeans and squinted at the engine of my beat-up Ford. 23 years of marriage, and I'd learned to read Diana's moods like weather patterns. Tonight felt like a storm brewing. "Eli, you still out there?" Diana's voice carried that fake sweetness she used when she was hiding something. "Just finishing up," I called back, though the carburetor was nowhere near fixed. I'd been putting off this repair for weeks, mostly because working with my hands kept me sane while everything else in my life seemed to be falling apart. My name is Eli Carter, and 6 months ago I thought I had it all figured out. 47 years old, decent job managing accounts at a mid-sized finance company, a split-level house in Millbrook Heights that we'd been paying off for 15 years. Diana had just gotten promoted to senior agent at Prestige Properties. Our daughter Lizzie was thriving at Northwestern, and I was actually starting to think about retirement. Then the layoffs hit. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, just numbers on a spreadsheet. Diana took the news better than I expected. Too well, actually. While I was drowning in rejection letters and unemployment forms, she was working later, taking more clients, and suddenly had a whole new vocabulary filled with words like leverage and market positioning. The whispering stopped inside. I heard footsteps on hardwood, then the familiar creak of our bedroom door closing. Diana was hiding something, and after 23 years of marriage, I knew the difference between work stress and guilty conscience. I gathered my tools and headed for the side door, but stopped when I heard a car door slam in our driveway. Through the gap in our fence, I watched a silver BMW pull away from the curb. Rick Morrison's car, Diana's colleague from the real estate office. My stomach twisted. Rick was the kind of guy who wore designer suits to coffee shops and called everyone buddy while looking over their shoulder for someone more important to talk to. He'd been showing up at our house more often lately, always with some excuse about work documents or client meetings. I slipped inside through the kitchen, where Diana's laptop sat open on the counter. The screen was still lit up with what looked like property listings. My property listings. Our house address was right there at the top of the page, along with photos I'd never seen before. Professional photos of our living room, our bedroom, our backyard. "What the hell?" I muttered, scrolling down. The listing was marked "Private Sale, Qualified Buyers Only," with Rick Morrison listed as the primary agent. Eli? Diana appeared in the doorway, looking startled. "I thought you were outside." "I was. Just came in for some water." I gestured at the laptop screen. "Interesting reading material." Her face went pale, then flushed red. We're exploring options, with your job situation and all. Our house is for sale, and I'm just now hearing about it?" "It's not for sale. We're just testing the market. Rick thinks we could get a really good price if we move fast." There it was again. Moving fast. The same phrase I'd heard her whisper on the phone. "And you didn't think to mention this to me because—" Diana closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "Because I knew you'd overreact. Just like you're doing now." "I'm overreacting? Diana, this is our home. We've been here for 15 years. Lizzie grew up here. Lizzie's in college now. She doesn't need a childhood bedroom anymore. And honestly, Eli, we can't afford this place on just my income." The words hit like a slap. Just my income. As if my 20 years of steady paychecks had been erased the moment I got laid off. "I'm looking for work. You know that. Looking isn't finding." Diana's voice had gone cold, businesslike. "Rick has a buyer who's very interested. Cash offer, quick closing. We could be debt-free and have money left over for a fresh start." "What kind of fresh start?" She hesitated, and in that pause I heard everything she wasn't saying. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "We can talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down." But I wasn't going to calm down. Not tonight. After Diana went upstairs, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat at the kitchen table, staring at her closed laptop. 23 years of marriage, and she was making decisions about our future with another man. A man who probably made more in commission last month than I used to make in 6. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your wife's been busy. Check the real estate listings tomorrow. You might be surprised what you find. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. Someone else knew what Diana was up to. Someone who thought I should know about it. I walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. Across the street, Mrs. Gibbons was watering her garden in the dark, her phone glowing in her free hand. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 30 years and knew everyone's business better than they did themselves. As I watched, she looked up at our house and gave me a little wave. Then she went back to her watering, but I noticed she kept glancing in our direction. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. Ask her about the papers she had Rick sign today. Ask her whose name is on them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed listening to Diana breathe beside me, wondering how long she'd been planning this. Every small change over the past few months suddenly made sense. The way she'd started doing laundry separately. How she'd moved her important papers to a filing cabinet in her home office that I wasn't supposed to touch. The new password on her laptop. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make coffee. Diana's laptop was gone from the kitchen counter, but her purse was still hanging on the chair where she'd left it. I'd never been the kind of husband who went through his wife's things, but desperate times and all that. Her phone was password protected, but I knew Diana well enough to guess. Lizzie's birthday. The screen unlocked on my second try. The text messages with Rick went back 3 months. Casual at first. Work stuff, client meetings, market updates, but they got more personal as they went on, and more secretive. Rick. Eli doesn't need to know about the preliminary listing. We'll present it as a done deal. Diana. He's been so depressed about the job situation. I don't want to add to his stress. Rick. You're protecting him. I get it. But Diana, you deserve better than this. Diana. It's complicated. Rick. It doesn't have to be. The buyer I told you about is serious. Cash offer, no inspection, close in 2 weeks. You could be free of all this. Free of all this. Free of me. I scrolled further back and found something that made my stomach drop. Photos of documents. Legal papers with signatures. My signature on a power of attorney form I'd never seen before. The handwriting was close, but not quite right. The E in Eli was too rounded, the R in Carter too sharp. Diana had forged my signature. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly put her phone back in her purse. By the time Diana walked into the kitchen, I was standing at the counter with my coffee, trying to look casual. Morning, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Morning. Sleep well? Fine. She grabbed her purse and laptop bag. I've got an early showing. Probably won't be home until late. With Rick? She paused at the door. Rick's a colleague, Eli. We work together. Right, just work. Something in my tone made her turn around. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just seems like you two have been working together a lot lately. He's helping me navigate a difficult situation. You should be grateful. What difficult situation? Diana sighed, like I was a child asking too many questions. The house, Eli. The mortgage payments. The fact that we're 3 months behind on the property taxes. That was news to me. 3 months? Why didn't you tell me? Because you have enough to worry about. I'm handling it. By selling our house behind my back? I'm not selling anything behind your back. I'm exploring options. There's a difference. She left before I could respond, and I stood in the empty kitchen feeling like a stranger in my own home. I called in sick to my part-time job at the hardware store. A humbling step down from my finance career, but it paid some bills, and spent the morning doing research. The property listing Diana had shown me was real, but it wasn't the only one. There were 3 different listings for our house on 3 different real estate websites, all with Rick Morrison as the agent. One was marked sold pending, with a closing date just 2 weeks away. My phone rang. Frank Kowalski, my old friend and boxing coach at Murphy's Gym. Eli, you sound like hell. You coming in today or what? Frank had been trying to get me back into boxing since I lost my job. Said it would be good therapy. Maybe he was right. Yeah, I'll be there. Need to hit something. That's what I like to hear. See you at 2. Murphy's gym was a throwback to another era. Exposed brick walls, heavy bags hanging from steel chains, the smell of leather and sweat. It was the kind of place where nobody asked about your job or your problems. They just handed you gloves and pointed you toward the bags. Frank was waiting for me with a knowing look. At 62, he was still built like a fire hydrant, with hands that could crack walnuts and a heart bigger than his ego. "So what's eating you?" he asked as I wrapped my hands. I told him everything. The secret listings, the forged signature, Rick Morrison and his silver BMW. Frank listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally like he'd heard this story before. "Let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "Your wife's planning to sell your house, take the money and run off with some real estate pretty boy, and she's doing it all legal-like with your forged signature. That's about the size of it." Frank grinned. "Well, hell, Eli. Sounds like you need to beat them at their own game." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if they want to play dirty, you better learn the rules real quick. You know Melinda Torres?" I knew the name. She was a rival agent at a competing firm, known for aggressive tactics and creative solutions. "She owes me a favor," Frank continued. "Her kid used to train here before he went off to college. Good boxer, better kid. Maybe it's time you had your own real estate agent." The idea was tempting, but I shook my head. I can't afford to hire an agent. Hell, I can barely afford groceries. Who said anything about hiring? I said she owes me a favor, and Melinda Torres pays her debts. That afternoon, Frank made the call. An hour later, I was sitting in Melinda's office downtown, laying out the whole sordid story. She listened with the intensity of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Your wife forged your signature," she said when I finished. "That's fraud. You could have her arrested." "I don't want her arrested. I just want to stop this sale." Melinda leaned back in her chair, thinking. "The buyer Rick found? Do you know who it is?" "No idea. The listing just says qualified buyer, cash offer." "Interesting, because I might have a better buyer, someone who could close faster and pay more." "Who?" She smiled. "Let's just say he's sitting right here in this office." I stared at her. "Me? I can't buy my own house. I don't have any money." "You don't need money. You need leverage. See, here's the thing about real estate, Eli. Possession is 9/10 of the law, but ownership is 10/10. Your name is on that deed, forged power of attorney or not. Diana can't sell what she doesn't legally own." "So, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we list your house ourselves. Today. Right now. With a better price and better terms than whatever Rick's offering his mystery buyer. Then we sit back and watch them scramble?" The plan was simple and brilliant. While Diana thought she was controlling the sale, I'd be controlling it from the other side. When her buyer showed up for the closing, they'd find out the house had already been sold to someone else. "But who's going to buy it?" I asked. Melinda's smile got wider. "Remember I said the buyer was sitting in this office?" I meant it. Frank Kowalski called in that favor. He's buying your house. Frank doesn't have that kind of money. Frank's got more money than you think. 30 years of training fighters, plus he owns the building his gym is in, plus 3 rental properties on the south side. Frank Kowalski is what we call quietly wealthy. I felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. And then what? I can't afford to pay Frank back. You don't pay him back. You pay him rent. Same amount you're paying now in mortgage, but now you're renting from a friend instead of being foreclosed on by a bank. Diana gets nothing, Rick gets nothing, and you get to stay in your home. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. What's the catch? The catch is we have to move fast. If Diana's closing in 2 weeks, we need to close in 1 week. And we need to do it without her knowing. I thought about Diana's face that morning, the way she'd looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a husband to be loved. Let's do it. The next week was a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and carefully orchestrated deception. Melinda worked her magic with mortgage brokers and title companies while I played the role of oblivious husband. Diana came and went at odd hours, always with her phone pressed to her ear, always whispering about timelines and closing dates. She had no idea that while she was planning her secret sale, I was planning my own. The hardest part was acting normal, sitting across from Diana at dinner, making small talk about her day, pretending I didn't know she was betraying me with every breath. She'd gotten better at hiding her phone, but she couldn't hide the guilt written across her face. "You seem distracted," I said one evening as she pushed food around her plate. "Just work stuff. Big deal closing soon. Anything I can help with?" She looked up sharply like I'd caught her stealing. "No, it's fine. Just complicated paperwork." I used to be pretty good with complicated paperwork. Back when I had a real job. The words came out more bitter than I'd intended. Diana's expression softened slightly. "Eli, I know this has been hard on you. The job situation, the money problems. But things are going to get better soon. I promise." For a moment, I almost felt guilty about what I was planning. Then I remembered the forged signature and Rick Morrison's silver BMW in our driveway. "How soon?" "Soon. Maybe next week." "Next week." The same timeline Melinda had given me for our closing. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Papers signed. Welcome to the rental market, buddy." I excused myself from dinner and went to the garage, where I could finally let myself smile. In 6 days, Diana would show up for her secret closing and discover that the house had already been sold. To me. But first, I had to make sure Rick Morrison's mystery buyer was real. I spent Thursday evening parked across the street from Rick's office, watching him through the windows as he worked late. Around 9 p.m., a black Escalade pulled up and a man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. I followed them to dinner at an upscale steakhouse downtown, staying far enough back to avoid being spotted but close enough to see them shake hands over dessert. Rick handed the man a folder of documents, and the man handed Rick what looked like a check. The deal was real. Diana had a legitimate buyer waiting to purchase our house, and she planned to complete the sale without my knowledge or consent. I drove home feeling like I was living in a spy movie, except the stakes were my marriage and my home instead of national security. Diana was already in bed when I got back, but her laptop was open on the kitchen counter again. This time, I didn't hesitate to look. Her email inbox was full of messages from Rick, the title company, and someone named Gerald Hutchinson, presumably the silver-haired man from the restaurant. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 a.m. Diana had requested the day off work, telling her boss she had a dental appointment. A dental appointment that would net her $300,000. I forwarded the emails to my own account, then deleted the forwarded messages from Diana's sent folder. If she was going to play spy games, I was going to play them better. Friday morning, Melinda called with good news. "We're all set for Monday at 9 a.m. Frank's financing came through, title search is clean, and I've got the deed transfer ready to file. By the time your wife shows up for her closing, you'll already own the house free and clear." What happens when she finds out? That's the beautiful part. Legally, there's nothing she can do. She can't sell a house she doesn't own, and she can't claim fraud because her buyer will have to verify ownership before completing the purchase. When they run the title search Monday morning, they'll find out Frank bought it from you on Friday. Wait, Friday? I thought we were closing Monday. Change of plans. Rick's people moved their closing up to Monday, so we're moving ours up to Friday. Always stay one step ahead, Eli. That's rule number 1 in this business. Friday's closing was surreal. I sat in a conference room downtown, signing papers that transferred ownership of my house to Frank, who immediately signed a rental agreement that let me stay there indefinitely. Legally, I was now a tenant in my own home. Practically, I was protected from Diana's scheme and Rick's buyer. "How does it feel to be a renter?" Frank asked as we walked out of the title office. "Feels like freedom," I said, and meant it. But the real test would come Monday morning, when Diana discovered her carefully laid plans had been demolished. I spent the weekend in a state of nervous anticipation. Diana was unusually cheerful, humming while she made coffee and actually asking about my weekend plans. She thought she was hours away from her new life, and the guilt was making her generous. I was thinking, she said Sunday night as we watched TV, maybe we should take a vacation soon. Get away somewhere warm. We can't afford a vacation, Diana. Remember, I'm unemployed. Things might be changing soon. I might have some good news this week. I looked at her sitting there on our couch, in our living room, planning to steal our house and call it good news. 23 years of marriage. And I was looking at a stranger. What kind of good news? Just financial stuff, boring details. But good news. Monday morning, Diana left the house at 8:30, telling me she'd be back after her dental appointment. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then called in sick to the hardware store and settled in to wait for the fireworks. At 10:15, my phone rang. Diana. Eli, I need you to come downtown right now. Why? I thought you were at the dentist. Just, please, come to the Prestige Properties office, now. She hung up before I could ask more questions, but I could hear the panic in her voice. The plan was working. I took my time getting dressed, then drove slowly downtown, savoring every minute of Diana's confusion and Rick's embarrassment. When I walked into the Prestige Properties office, I found Diana, Rick, and the silver-haired man from the restaurant huddled around a computer screen, all looking like they'd seen a ghost. Eli! Diana jumped up from her chair. Thank God you're here. There's been some kind of mistake. What kind of mistake? Rick cleared his throat. It appears there was some confusion about the ownership status of your property. The title search shows it was sold on Friday to a Frank Kowalski. I did my best to look surprised. Frank bought our house? When did that happen? That's what we're trying to figure out, Diana said. Did you sign any papers recently? Any documents Frank might have given you? Well, yeah. He helped me set up a rental agreement so I could stay in the house after he bought it. Didn't you know about that? The silence in the room was deafening. Diana stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You sold our house to Frank? I sold my house to Frank. My name was on the deed, remember? Rick stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. Mr. Carter, I think there might be some confusion here. Your wife had arranged a sale of the property to Mr. Hutchinson here. We had a signed purchase agreement. I looked at the silver-haired man who was checking his watch and looking increasingly annoyed. Signed by who? By you, Rick said, pulling out a folder. We have your signature right here. I took the document and studied it carefully. There was my forged signature again, same rounded E and sharp R that I'd seen on Diana's phone. This isn't my signature, I said loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. Diana's face went white. Eli, don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. Look at this. I held up the paper. This is a terrible forgery. The E is all wrong, and I never write my R like that. Someone forged my signature. Rick snatched the paper back. That's impossible. Diana provided that signature herself. The words hung in the air like a confession. Diana shot Rick a look that could have melted steel, but it was too late. Everyone in the room now knew she'd forged my signature. Mr. Hutchinson stood up and straightened his tie. I don't know what kind of game you people are playing, but I don't have time for it. When you have clear title to the property, call my office. Until then, consider our agreement void. He walked out without another word, leaving Diana and Rick staring at each other in horror. This is your fault, Diana hissed at Rick. You said this would work. My fault? You're the one who insisted on forging his signature instead of just asking him to sign. I couldn't ask him to sign. He would have asked questions. I cleared my throat. I'm standing right here. They both turned to look at me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. So let me get this straight, I said. You two were planning to sell my house without my knowledge, using a forged signature, and split the proceeds. Is that about right? Eli, it's not what it looks like, Diana started. Really? Because it looks like fraud, and theft, and probably a few other felonies I can't pronounce. Rick was already backing toward the door. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Diana, we should discuss this later. Don't you dare leave me here, Diana snapped, but Rick was already gone. We stood there in the empty office, 23 years of marriage reduced to this moment of betrayal and recrimination. Why? I asked. Diana slumped into her chair, suddenly looking older than her 44 years. Because I'm tired, Eli. I'm tired of struggling, tired of worrying about money, tired of watching you mope around the house feeling sorry for yourself. So you decided to steal our house and run away with Rick? I decided to take control of my life. Rick offered me a way out, and I took it. A way out of what? Our marriage? She looked up at me with eyes full of tears and something that might have been relief. Yes. The word hung between us like a blade. Yes, after 23 years, 3 miscarriages, a mortgage, a daughter, and 1,000 shared dreams, Diana wanted out. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt liberated. Well then, I said, I guess we both got what we wanted. You're free to go and I get to keep my house. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It's not that simple, Eli. There are legal issues now, financial obligations, Lizzie's tuition. Lizzie's tuition is covered by her scholarship and student loans. As for legal issues, you might want to worry about the fraud charges before you worry about the divorce settlement. You wouldn't press charges, not against me. She was probably right, but I wasn't going to tell her that. Let her sweat a little. Try me. I walked out of the office and left Diana sitting there with her shattered plans and her missing co-conspirator. The afternoon sun felt warmer than it had in months, and for the first time since losing my job, I felt like I could breathe again. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. Lizzie. Dad, what the hell is going on? Mom just called me crying about the house being sold and Rick Morrison disappearing and something about fraud charges? I'd been dreading this conversation. Lizzie had always been closer to Diana, and I wasn't sure whose side she'd take when the dust settled. It's complicated, sweetheart. Your mom and I are having some problems. Problems? Dad, she said you sold the house to Frank without telling her. She said you ruined some business deals she was working on. Is that what she said? She said Rick was helping her refinance the mortgage to get us out of debt, and you sabotaged it because you were jealous of Rick's success. I had to admire Diana's ability to spin the story. In her version, she was the victim and I was the petty, jealous husband who'd rather see us all suffer than let another man help us. Lizzie, your mother forged my signature on legal documents and tried to sell our house without my knowledge. That's not refinancing. That's theft. Silence on the other end of the line. She wouldn't do that, Lizzie said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I have the documents. I have the forged signatures. I have text messages between her and Rick going back 3 months. More silence. Why didn't you tell me things were this bad? Because you're 19 years old and in college. This isn't your problem to solve. It is if you two are getting divorced. The word sounded strange coming from her. Divorced. After all these years of thinking our marriage was solid, it was ending not with a whimper, but with a felony. I'm sorry, Lizzie. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I need some time to process this. Can I call you later? Of course. I love you, sweetheart. I love you too, Dad. She hung up, and I sat in my car in the parking lot, wondering how many other relationships Diana's betrayal was going to destroy. The answer came sooner than I expected. That evening, I was heating up leftover pizza when someone knocked on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw Jules Brennan, Diana's best friend and fellow real estate agent. She was holding a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of sympathetic expression people reserve for funerals. Hey, Eli. I heard about what happened today. I thought you might want to talk. Jules had been Diana's friend since college, and she'd been a regular presence in our lives for over 2 decades. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, brought casseroles when people were sick, and always knew the right thing to say in difficult situations. I let her in, partly because I was curious about what Diana had told her, and partly because I could use the company. Diana called me, Jules said, settling onto the couch with 2 glasses of wine. She's pretty upset. I bet she is. She said there was some kind of misunderstanding about the house sale. Something about Rick Morrison and a buyer who backed out. Interesting. Diana's story was evolving, becoming less incriminating with each telling. Is that what she said? Jules studied my face. What really happened, Eli? I told her the truth. All of it. The forged signatures, the secret meetings, Rick's mystery buyer, Frank's counter-purchase. Jules listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. Jesus, she said when I finished. I had no idea it had gone that far. You knew something was going on? Jules looked uncomfortable. I knew Diana was unhappy. She'd been talking about feeling trapped, about wanting a fresh start. But I thought she meant couples therapy, maybe a trial separation. I didn't know she was planning to steal my house and disappear? She wouldn't have disappeared, Eli. Diana's not that kind of person. What kind of person forges her husband's signature on legal documents? Jules didn't have an answer for that. We finished the wine in relative silence, both of us processing the wreckage of a 23-year marriage. When Jules got up to leave, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Diana crossed a line, and you protected yourself. I just wish it hadn't come to this. So do I. After Jules left, I sat in my living room, my rented living room, and tried to figure out what came next. Diana would probably file for divorce, which meant lawyers and court dates and dividing up the remnants of our shared life. Lizzie would have to choose sides, or try not to choose sides, which might be worse. My few remaining friends would hear Diana's version of events and decide whether they believed her or me. The phone rang. Frank. How'd it go today, champ? Like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Frank chuckled. That good, huh? Well, look on the bright side. You've got a roof over your head, a job at the hardware store, and a standing invitation to beat the hell out of my heavy bags whenever you need to work off some frustration. Thanks, Frank. I owe you big time. You don't owe me anything. We're friends. Friends look out for each other. After I hung up, I realized Frank was the only person in my life who'd supported me without question or judgment. My wife had betrayed me. My daughter was confused and hurt, and my other friends would probably choose sides based on whoever told the most convincing story. But Frank had put his money where his mouth was, literally purchasing my house to save me from Diana's scheme. That was the kind of loyalty you couldn't buy or fake. I was going to need that loyalty, because something told me Diana wasn't done fighting. The next morning, I found out I was right. I was getting ready for work when someone pounded on my front door like they were trying to break it down. Through the window, I saw a sheriff's deputy standing on my porch with an official-looking document in his hand. Eli Carter? That's me. You're being served with a temporary restraining order. You're not allowed within 500 feet of Diana Carter or her place of employment. I stared at the papers. According to the filing, I had threatened Diana with physical violence, destroyed her business relationships through harassment and intimidation, and engaged in stalking behavior that made her fear for her safety. It was all lies, but it was all legal. There must be some mistake, I said. The deputy shrugged. Take it up with the court. You've got a hearing next week to contest the order. After he left, I called Melinda Torres. She's trying to control the narrative, Melinda explained. If she can make you look like the aggressor, it strengthens her position in the divorce proceedings, makes you look unstable, possibly violent. But none of it's true. Doesn't matter. Restraining orders are easy to get and hard to fight. The judge errs on the side of caution, especially in domestic situations. So what do? You follow the order to the letter, document everything, and prepare to fight back at the hearing. And Eli? You might want to think about getting a lawyer. A lawyer. More money I didn't have for a fight I'd never wanted. But as I sat in my rented house, holding Diana's restraining order and thinking about her forged signatures and Rick Morrison's silver BMW, I realized something important. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the guy who'd outmaneuvered them both and saved his own house in the process. If Diana wanted to fight dirty, I was ready to get my hands dirty too. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. in family court. I spent the weekend preparing my defense with the help of Melinda Torres, who turned out to have a law degree in addition to her real estate license. The key, she explained as we reviewed the restraining order, is to stay calm and stick to the facts. Diana's going to try to paint you as an unstable, potentially violent man who's been harassing her. You need to show the judge that you're the victim of fraud, not the perpetrator of domestic violence. We had evidence. The forged signatures, the secret real estate listings, the text messages between Diana and Rick. Most importantly, we had the timeline that proved Diana had been planning to defraud me for months before I took any action to protect myself. What about character witnesses? Melinda asked. Frank will testify. Maybe Jules if she's willing to tell the truth about what Diana told her. What about your daughter? I shook my head. I'm not dragging Lizzie into this mess. She's got enough to deal with. Monday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the moment Diana would walk into that courtroom and try to convince a judge that I was dangerous. After 23 years of marriage, it had come to this. Two people who'd once promised to love each other forever, now fighting in front of strangers about who was the bigger liar. Tuesday morning, I put on my best suit and drove downtown to the courthouse. Diana was already there with a lawyer I didn't recognize, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive outfit who radiated competence and aggression. Diana looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. She'd done something to her hair and was wearing makeup to cover what looked like sleepless nights. When she saw me, she immediately moved closer to her lawyer, as if I might attack her right there in the hallway. The performance had already begun. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hernandez. Judge Hernandez was a middle-aged Latina woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story and seen every dirty trick in the book. Diana's lawyer went first, painting a picture of an increasingly unstable husband who'd become violent and threatening after losing his job. According to her version of events, I had stalked Diana to her workplace, confronted her business associates with threats and intimidation, and engaged in a pattern of harassment designed to destroy her career. Your Honor, the lawyer said, my client fears for her safety. Carter has shown himself capable of elaborate deception and manipulation, including fraudulent property transactions designed to deprive my client of her rightful share of the marital assets. It was a masterful performance. Diana even managed to produce a few tears at the right moments. Then it was my turn. Melinda stood up with a folder full of documents. Your Honor, Mr. Carter is not the aggressor in this situation. He is the victim of a months-long scheme to defraud him of his home through forged signatures and illegal property transfers. She laid out the evidence methodically. The forged power of attorney, the secret real estate listings, the text messages between Diana and Rick Morrison. The timeline that showed Diana had been planning the fraud long before I took any defensive action. Your Honor, Melinda continued, Mrs. Carter is asking this court to protect her from the consequences of her own criminal behavior. She forged her husband's signature, attempted to sell his property without his knowledge or consent, and is now claiming to be the victim when her scheme was discovered. Judge Hernandez studied the documents, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Carter, she said finally, did you forge your husband's signature on these real estate documents? Diana's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but Diana shook her head. Your Honor, I was trying to protect our family's financial interests. My husband has been depressed and making poor decisions since he lost his job. I was afraid he would refuse to sell the house even though we couldn't afford the payments. That's not what I asked you, Mrs. Carter. Did you forge his signature? A long pause. Yes, Your Honor, but I was trying to help. Judge Hernandez set the documents aside and looked directly at Diana. Mrs. Carter, forgery is a felony. Attempting to sell property you don't own is theft. You're asking this court to issue a restraining order against the victim of your alleged crimes. Do you understand how that looks? Diana's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up her hand. I've heard enough. The restraining order is denied. Mrs. Carter, I strongly suggest you consult with a criminal defense attorney, because based on the evidence presented here today, you may need one. She banged her gavel, and it was over. After the ruling, Diana and her lawyer whispered about appeals while I walked out lighter than I'd felt in months. The feeling evaporated when Lizzie called. Channel 7 had blasted our hearing online. She drove home from Northwestern, demanded the truth, and I showed her everything. Forged forms, texts, listings, the timeline. She asked about charges. I admitted I wanted consequences, but craved an ending more. She urged closure. We met for coffee. Diana looked spent, apologized, and blamed fear. Of money, of losing the house, of my slump. I told her I wouldn't press charges, but I would file for divorce and keep the house. She agreed. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Diana moved to Phoenix to start over. Rick was arrested for other schemes. Lizzie finished her sophomore year, spent the summer with me, and we turned the spare room into a home office. I kept my hardware job, picked up bookkeeping, and arranged a rent-to-own to buy the house back. One September evening, Mrs. Gibbons ambled over, declared she'd always preferred me, and, eyes twinkling, said she'd even seen me slash that fancy man's tires. Later, Lizzie texted, A in real estate law. I sat on the porch under an orange-pink sky thinking, she's learning, Diana's gone, Rick's caged, and I'm home. In the house I saved, lost, fought for, and won back. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,